I'm sure I've just skimmed the surface of it, but so far I've been really impressed with, it's been like a novel to me, I don't want to put it down. But from what I understand, you could just correct me as you go along. What I understand is that Adrian Rouquette came over from New Orleans, where he was not a minister, but I guess a minister under I can't remember whose reign he was under, but I know he had come for two visits. One when he was young, which was I think he's in 1838. He came over here originally, and then he decided to come back when he was 45, which was in 1858, and that's when he wanted to establish his community, and he wanted to I guess make he wanted to see if he could make the Bayou Lacombe Indians Catholicized. Just not necessarily Catholicized, but he wanted to promote his beliefs in God, maybe perhaps Christianize them, and then he established his colony. Which, do you know where the Nook was exactly? Was that up north, perhaps a little bit towards St. Tammany?
No, it was on the Rouquette plantation.
Okay.
See, you know where Main Street is, where all the big oak trees and all are on Main Street, where the church is and so forth. That was Rouquette property, well, Cousin property.
Okay.
See, because Rouquette came from Cousin, the Cousin family, and they owned from about there. Actually, it was up closer to it. Well, from about Highway 190.
Okay.
All the way down the bayou to and beyond Creole Road. But Bell Park Road there's still a cross and a base there that was put there in 1913. That's the site of the Nook.
Okay.
Because it was on his family property that he built his first little area.
So that wasn't made aware to me. I didn't realize that he had family property. I thought maybe he was.
No, he'd been coming over here all the time. See, that was the problem, was that Adrienne was a spoiled brat, a spoiled, pampered Creole. He was Mama's favorite son, of course, all the Cousin boys were spoiled because that was the way they did it in those days, particularly among the Creoles. I mean, the males were just, really lionized. And females were just, subservient.
Right.
And so Terence and Dominique were his brothers, of course, and
I've read a little bit. I've heard some passages alluding to Dominique, not the other one, not Terrell.
Yeah, they anyway, they had their plantation here in Lacombe. They also had a place on Bayou St. John.
Okay.
See, and Adrian grew up in his father's wine shop.
Okay. On
Royal Street there. It's right next door to Brennan's. It's still there. I got a picture of it in the book. And his father committed suicide when he was young. And his mother died when he was about 16. So he was, a juvenile delinquent, I guess, is the best way of describing it. And he would run away from home to come over here because he loved it over on the North Shore. Mm-hmm. And he liked being with the Indians. Of course, as in any biography, I guess they clean it up, particularly after Guy became a priest.
Right.
But they say that he was in love with an Indian princess and, that type of bullshit. As it turns out, there were a lot of Indian girls who, as part of their hospitality training, were inclined to give away certain physical attributes.
Right.
it's likely to suppose that, of course, these highborn young Creole boys, you know, who hung out over here were hanging out over here for more reasons than the beauty of the forest.
Right.
So, as a matter of fact, a lot of Rouquette's early poetry, and then probably some of his other, the poetry and novels of his brothers too, reflected that not obsession, but that feeling for the ladies of the Indian tribe. You know? And there was no such thing as a princess. They didn't have a structured royalty.
Wasn't that romanticized?
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, but he was always coming over here, even when he wasn't supposed to. They had family schooners, so you know he could hitch a ride on one of the schooners coming over here with no problem. But he would run away from home, and they'd have to come over here and get him back and drag him back to the city. He didn't like school. You know, I think the boy's mind was probably more developed along creative, artistic things. And in those days, you know, this is what you had to do. You had to learn Greek. You had to learn Latin. You know, I mean, things that he just really didn't give a whole heck of a lot for. So anyway, when his mother died at 16, his guardian, whom I haven't found out who that was yet. I've been to the Ursuline Convent, which is where the Archdiocese stores its archival material. And the curator just brought out tray after tray of card files on Rouquette and his writings. And, you know, so like you say, you're right. If you could get into it, he's a very fascinating person. And of course, Dagmar Lebreton wrote really about him as a priest and his vocation and all that. But I'm more interested in his early periods, which is more contemporaneous with myself. When I went to Hollywood when I was 17 years old, and right out from a Catholic boarding school. So you know there was a certain
Culture shock, huh?
impulsiveness that I can see I shared with Rouquette, you know. So anyway, his guardian sent him to a boarding school in Kentucky because they figured, well, you know, he can't run away from that. Well, he did. He ran away from there, and he was over here in Lacombe, you know, doing swimming and canoeing and hunting and drinking and whatever else, you know, that they did as young boys, young men, really. And he was here for quite a while before they discovered that he was missing. So they said, well, we're going to fix his ass. We'll send him over to Europe, which is what they did, to study law. Well, that was, you know, I mean, for a person of his caliber and creative ability to be forced into the legal profession, you know, was an anathema. So just like Shakespeare says, you know, first you kill the lawyers. So he was not in particular mode of mind to be a lawyer. So he would naturally hang out with the rat pack of the day, which was the artists and, you know, writers, painters of mid-19th century Paris, which, I mean, what's his name, Barlane and Rochefort, and I can't remember the whole mess of them, but they were all druggies. You know, they did absinthe. They probably smoked marijuana and did some of the other drugs which were prevalent in the day, laudanum, which was an opiate derivative. You know.
Kind of equivalent to the 1950s coffee shop crowd, huh?
Yeah,
So on.
exactly. You know, the left bank of Paris. I mean, there's been books written about Toulouse-Lautrec. You know, I mean, it was a little short guy who hung out with whores. You know, I mean, he loved being with whores. And probably, you know, that I don't have any definitive stamped proof of that, but knowing the way young men are, it's quite likely that he was with the in crowd. And there are records that he hung out with the French court, because at that time, I forget who the king was, but he was eventually overthrown in the Revolution of 1848. And as a matter of fact, I point out in the book that our sisters of Mount Carmel up the bayou there, that he wrote a poem about, they just coincidence put them on the same ship back to America because the founder of their order had supported the royalists and in the revolution that overthrew them. Of course, the Republic won, and so they were kicked out and eventually came to Lacombe. So, but anyway, he had a particularly bad experience one Mardi Gras when he partied too hard, and the next day went to Notre Dame to receive the ashes. And that's when he probably in a hungover, you know, downstate after doing whatever drugs and so forth they did, you know, realized that his life was a bowl of crap and that he better do something about it. He knew definitely didn't want to study law anymore, so he decided to come back to America. And it wasn't like a thunderbolt that hit him at that time, but that was probably the crossing of the Rubicon, where he decided that the avocation to the priesthood would develop. And I think it was because of this guy, he was a French orator, who preached at Notre Dame on that Ash Wednesday. I think that had a lot to do with his decision later on to be a priest. So he eventually came back to America, became a priest, and you know, came to the conclusion after seeing the inequities inherent with the system of slavery that existed at the time. Excuse me. He became quite prominent in the church because he was the right-hand man to the Archbishop. Well, I think it was Blum, Archbishop Blum. That would be like, you know, me being right-hand man to Archbishop Schulten. So he was right high up there in the church at St. Louis Cathedral, but he still had the urge to be over here and to be with his Indians.
They didn't like it very much when he came over here, did they? I think I read where Archbishop Blank didn't approve at all of him coming over here.
No.
Possibly because he was losing a good, priest. You know,
well, I'm sure that had a lot to do with it. But I mean, let's face it, priests are not a dime a dozen, but nevertheless, the Catholic Church teaches that you cannot stay in any one place long. It's like the military. You go, you got a job to do, you're sent to do it. So he was basically going against the whole structure of the church and, you know, deciding on his own that he would be a missionary over here. And of course, he had to go through the channels, and he petitioned some of his powerful church friends. I forget the name of the dude over in Texas, but he was the Archbishop of Texas, who was a buddy with Rouquette. So, you know, in a lot of this transcribed material, you kind of got to read between the lines. You know, a good historian can look at what somebody else has put down and deduce, probably more than what is written.
Yeah, and also see what perspective they're writing from, whether it's biased or not.
That's exactly right.
So he just, I mean, from what I read, he basically just concentrated on the one tribe in Bayou Lacombe, right? Which was the,
Choctaw.
right.
Well, the Choctaw actually were not here originally. The Colapisa Indians were here first, that we know of. And of course, remember, just like today, you cannot, find a lot of Irishmen in the Irish Channel.
Right, Vietnamese now.
Right, I mean, they've, passed on, the whole situation has evolved. But Indians were in this area we know of at least between 8,000 and 12,000 years ago. So what they call themselves, we don't know. But at the time that Iberville came across and camped out at the mouth of Bayou Lacombe in 1620. As a matter of fact, what's the day? March 28th.
Yeah.
Right? Today. Camped out March 28, 1699, on Goose Point at the mouth of Bayou Lacombe. And then Bienville, after Iberville went back to France, Bienville did a lot of exploration, and he was the one who made contact in the Pearl River with the Colapisa Indians. So they had eventually moved to Bayou Castaigne.
Okay.
Now, once Bienville established New Orleans, it's a straight shot from Bayou Lacombe to Bayou St. John. And with all the resources that they had over here, they needed marine supplies, tar, resin, lumber, charcoal, all of which was supplied by Lacombe.
Great piney woods on the
Yeah.
North Shore. Yeah.
And so it was when the Choctaw, who were over in Mississippi, saw the potential for trade with the French, then their trading contingent, or whatever you might want to call them, came over and settled along Bayou Lacombe, Bayou Castaigne, Bayou Bonfouca.
Right.
But mainly you're right here on Bayou Lacombe. Now, the one thing that I can't pin down is, in everything I've researched, it says that they had a village at the headwaters, and that would put them up near Talashique, and I just can't feature that they would be that far up. And so I don't know if the translation of headwaters is accurate or what, but they would always seek a high spot, so a ridge or a mound or something would be where they would naturally make an encampment in a village, and to be close to the resources of the lake, they would camp. That's why people here, even today, they don't say, I live on such and such a street. They say, I stay. I stay over there in 44 Quarters, or I stay down Lake Road, And because of that, they used to stay here in the summer and then stay there in the winter and so forth. So the main village, Boucher.
Yeah, Bouchure.
Yeah.
The Bouchure, that's the one that's mainly focused on through the readings that I've been, that I've encountered with, is that he mainly, dealt with the Bouchure and the Choctaw, which is basically, Bouchure, I guess, there's some Choctaw in Abita, there's some Choctaw in Big Branch, which is called La Ravine de Ponds. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Choctaw are spread out, but basically the ones that he focused on were the Bouchure, which was the Bayou Lacombe. And is that correct?
No. He traveled.
Okay.
I mean, this was his base. This was headquarters,
Okay.
But no, he built little chapels all through the woods.
Okay.
When he first came here, remember, he was reformed.
Right.
You know, he was no longer this guy that hung out with the Indians. And you got to remember too the perspective of the era. The Indians sucked. I mean, they were
Frowned upon, looked like they were.
less than dogs.
Right.
You see, I mean, I teach this when I give my seminars on the Indian, because see, I can remember. Well, I still have an aunt. She's 80 some odd years old. She will not admit that her father was a Cherokee Indian because he was called the woods nigger. So
Right.
the blacks at least were accorded the status of property.
Right.
You see, I mean, he may have been a warrior or a chieftain over in Africa or just an ordinary Joe walking through the forest, you know, but when he came here, they were looked upon as property to be bought and sold and bred and, you know, raised just like cattle or just like our automobiles today. They were useful as a tool to perform a service, which was to rape the resources
Cultivate the cash crop.
Right, exactly. So Indians were less than that, you know. It didn't, blacks had, you know, they could be accorded status of like mules and cotton gins and so many acres and so much inventory and all that. Indians, I mean, they were less than dogs. So, and they were in an impoverished state due to the being decimated by European diseases and many other things that affected their psychological attitude also. And as you may know, if your mental attitude, your psychology, your psyche is not confident within itself, it reflects in you physically. And so, I mean, look at me. You know, I mean, right now my psyche is at a real low point, and I've let everything go. You see, I should be working on this place, trying to build it like I want, but I can't. So therefore, I live under these circumstances. So that's how the Choctaw were. They had originally come from Yucatan, and that goes into a whole nother thing about their legends of transmigration from a place to the west and so forth. But again, I go into that in my seminars. But suffice it to say, they were here in Mississippi, southern Mississippi, Alabama, and into Georgia. So when the French came, they saw a great opportunity because the Choctaw were traders. They were sort of the Chinese of the Indian world, you know, because they were great traders, and Chinese are.
They weren't they pushed east, or I'm sorry, weren't they pushed west also? That wasn't that a significant factor by the Spanish and the Americans.
Oh,
They were pushed into Louisiana territory by them because of I know that Dr. Mr. Nichols has told us that in class. That
yeah.
was one of the significant factors.
Well, see, the Choctaw and the Chickasaw were related. See, they both came
Right.
from Mexico in a migration together, and then at Baton Rouge, see, they were led by a red pole, the sacred red pole of the Maya. And whatever direction it would lead, they would follow. And for 42 years, they wandered, or not wandered, I mean, I don't mean to make it sound like the Exodus, although there's a lot of similarities between the Exodus of the Jews out of Egypt and these, but they wandered or marched for 42 years, you know, mainly because it was a big contingent of people that were forced out of Yucatan. And so, you know, with their animals and their children and all, you couldn't just get up and walk. So But then on the banks of the Mississippi River, the pole stood upright and meant that they would go no further. This was their promised land. Because when they looked out from that high bluff and saw the Mississippi River, it was a flood stage because they described it as water everywhere. So it just covered everything. As far as they could see, it was water.
The east bank of the Mississippi River has always been the highest point anyway, hasn't it? Like all along the east bank.
Yeah, that.
The west bank's kind of like you can look down upon it.
Right, right. But you see, they were on the west bank.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and that's what I say. It wasn't that they stood on top of the bank necessarily, you know, but on the west bank, when they saw this water everywhere, you know, and that was above water, they knew that that was a promised land. So, I'm sorry, that's right. They didn't stop on the west bank. They did go, you know, obviously to the east, because that's when they spread to the south, all the way to the Atlantic Ocean, and they became the Creek, and then the Seminole, of course. But Seminole is not a tribal name; it means renegade, just like Comanche is renegade, you know. Okay. So they split at that point, and I think it was two brothers that led the migration, because the Chata were the followers of Cha, who was the rain god. And see, that's why they, probably a combination of factors, forced them out of Yucatan. I've been in an underground river there where the stalactites are only about that much, you know. So that shows that the river went dry at a comparatively recent age, and you know, all the research points to about 1,000 years ago is when something happened, whether it was war with the Itzes or climatic changes or what, but these were the worshipers of the rain god. So when the rain left them,
had to seek elsewhere.
That's right. So they were told to go in the direction of the pole, and it would guide them to a land where water was plentiful, water everywhere. That's why they named it Misasipcoyan, which, you know, in Mayan means, or I don't know if it's Mayan or Algonquin. I'm not a language guy, you know, but although there's a lot to be learned in linguistic relationships. But anyway, getting back to the pole, the followers of Chak went to the south. The followers of Chichen went to the north, and they became the Chichen Itzas, or the Chickasaws, and the British called them Chickasaw. So they went into northern Mississippi, Tennessee, you know, on over that way, until they came in contact with the Cherokee, which is my tribe, which were Iroquoian. And see, we were mixed with the white colonists from Vinland, the Vikings, you know, the Algonquin, Iroquois, but Mohawk.
My wife's Chickasaw, or she has a lot of Chickasaw in her.
Your wife is? Oh, really? Yeah, cool.
Her,
well,
her
we
father,
won't fight.
Her father is Elliot. They descended from Oklahoma. You know, the Chickasaw.
Oh, yeah.
In Oklahoma. I don't know if that's that's probably a little bit later in the Chickasaw era, but they have some land out there, and they have a lot of deep roots in the Chickasaw tribe.
Oh, that's neat.
The Bushura, what I don't understand is so basically you're telling me that all the Choctaw, like the Day of the Dead, where they had the celebration, where they had the dance and all that back with the tribes, is Rouquette the only person to ever see That's what it shows, or it supposedly says that Rouquette's one of the only people to ever see the Day of the Dead celebration by the
Yeah.
Bouchers and
Well, remember, see, when he first came over here, like I say, you know, he was coming over to reform them.
right.
See, so I mean, what's the first thing? You know, you go into a bar or you know a crack house and say, "Hey, come clean yourselves up," you know, blah blah blah. Get with Christ. Fuck you. You know, I mean, right? That it was the same thing that they had. They said, "What happened to you, man?" You know, yeah, we thought you were one of us. Now you're one of these fruity, you know, priests from New Orleans. Fuck out. You know, bug out. Get out of here. I mean, you used to all these fancy manners. You got wine, you know. You live in a big house over there. Get out of my face. It'd be just the same, you know.